Test, test, test. Hi, friends. Come on in and join us. Have a seat. So nice to have you here with us. Well, we're going to have a short service, and part of Jewish tradition in having this short service is an opportunity to say a prayer at the very end, which is Kaddish. Kaddish isn't about death or dying, it's really just a praise of God. And part of our Jewish tradition is to say it for those who can't do it themselves. That's how we express our love, honor, respect to people that we've cared about. And so tonight, we're Bob's Kaddish. And I find that to be meaningful and comforting. And I'm wearing this microphone because we are live streaming. And for folks that might be following us online, we hope that we're glad that you're here with us too, and appreciate your presence, and we'll be able to join together. For the folks that are in our sanctuary, we have a little prayer book, and I promise to tell you what page we're on and follow along with us. If you hear a phone ring, this is how we're letting people into our building. So David will be taking care of that phone, and when somebody checks in, making sure that people are here in the right space. So I invite you just to take a breath, and we'll start our service. If you open up the book, and remember it's a Hebrew opening book, so it's going the other direction, join us on page 1A. Do you need a book? You're right. Page 1A. We are assembled with our friends and sharing comfort with one another. We raise our voices together in prayer to the source of life, asking for comfort and strength. We need light when gloom darkens our homes. To whom shall we look, if not to the Creator of light? We need fortitude and courage when pain and loss assail us. Where shall we find them, if not in the thought of the one who preserves all that is good from destruction? Who among us has not passed through trials and bereavements? Some bear fresh wounds in their hearts and therefore feel more keenly the kinship of sorrow. Others, whose days of mourning are more remote, still recall the comfort that sympathy brought to their sorrowing hearts. All things pass. All that lives must die. All that we prize is but lent to us, and the time comes when we must surrender it. We are travelers on the same road that leads to the same end. Let's turn to 4A, and I invite you to rise if you are able. Baruch hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed. On 5B. O God, you are as near as the very air we breathe, yet farther than the farthermost star. We yearn to reach you. We seek the light and warmth of your presence. Though we say you are near, we are lonely and alone. Oh, let our desire be so strong that it will tear the veil that keeps you from our sight. Let your light release our darkness and reveal the glory and joy of your presence. Baruch atah Adonai HaMa'ariv Aravim. On 6B, I invite you to join with me. All goodness and truth are yours, O God. May no evil estrange us from you. Let error not confound us. Help us understand your will, In adversity and prosperity, may your law be our light. May our deeds reflect your love. Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. We turn the page. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod, Malchuto Leolam Vaed. We can be seated on 8a. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha ve'hayu advarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha ayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shiftecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'derech uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha u'kshartam leot al yadecha v'ayu letotafot bein einecha uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uv'isharecha leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'yitem kedoshim le'eloheichem Ani Adonai Eloheichem Asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim leot lachem le'Elohim Ani Adonai Eloheichem Adonai Eloheichem Emet. On 10a. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar ba'kodesh, norat teilot osef eleh, malchutecha ra'uvanecha, boker yam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, Ze'eli anu ve'amru Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed v'nemar kifadal Adonai et Yaakov go'alo miyad chazak mimenu Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. On 11b. Give us a place to rest, O God. Bring us into shelter in the soft, long evening shadows of your truth. For with you are true protection and safety, and in your presence is gentle love. Watch over us as we go forth. Prepare for us as we return. Spread over us your shelter of peace over all we love, over Jerusalem. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, shomer amo Yisrael la'ad. 12a. Yitkandal v'yitkadash shemei rabba, b'yalma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בגלה בגלה, ובזמן קריב, ויאמרו, יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעלם לעלמי עלמיה, יתברך, יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה ברכו לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמא ויאמרו Amen. We continue on 13a, and for the following pages we'll do a number of prayers, one after the other, all on the right side, that A side. But we begin and move into the tefillah together on 13a. Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Vekonei Hakol, Vezocher Chasdei Avot Vimaot, Mevi Gula Levnei Vneihem, Leman Shemo V'Yahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magin Avraham ve'Ezrat Sarah, Ata Gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechayei hakol ata Rav lehoshia, Mashiv haruach u'morid hagashem, Mechalkel chaim bechesed, Mechayei hakol berachamim rabim. Somech noflim ve'rofeh cholim, umatir asurim, umekayem emunato lishenei afar, micha mocha ba'al gevurot, umido melach, melech memit, ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיה הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יעלו חסלה. ברוך אתה אדוני Ha'el HaKadosh. This is where we continue silently and privately. If you'd like to follow along in the prayer book, you can begin on page 18. On the right side of the page spread are traditional readings. On the left side, other interpretations and poems and texts. Choose wherever you're most comfortable. We'll come together again when we reach page 25. Or just take some time for some quiet and your own personal prayers or reflections. Once you're ready, you can return to your seats. 25a. Ose shalom bimromav, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, imru amen. Ose shalom bimromav, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, imru amen. Yase shalom, yase shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yase shalom, yase shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. There's a reading that I'm always drawn to in this prayer book on the left side, those creative readings. If you wanted to look, it's on 23b. Let us treasure the time we have and resolve to use it well, counting each moment precious, a chance to apprehend some truth, to experience some beauty, to conquer some evil, to relieve some suffering, to love and be loved, to achieve something of lasting worth. Help us, God, to fulfill the promise that is in each of us, and so to conduct ourselves that, generations hence, it will be true to say of us, the world is better because, for a brief space, they lived in it. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha u'lecha na'eh lehodot. We turn forward again to 26a. I invite you to rise again if you're able. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol, late gedula leotzer breshit, shelo asanu kokei haratzot, velo samanu kamishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chalkenu kahem, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשיבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת. In 27b, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. On 28a, a psalm that I think is familiar to lots of folks, but this particular translation always gives me pause. And kind of, since it's not the one we're used to perhaps, it makes us slow down and think about what the psalm is supposed to be about, which is ultimately about hope and comfort. And that's why so many people who are mourners will read this particular psalm. I think for us, I know there's lots of people that have sadness. And two, to be sure, for Bob's family who can't be with us tonight, we hope that their paths and their journeys are going to be gentle and that there's going to be loving people around them to accompany them where they go. But I invite you to read this with me on 28a. A psalm of David. Adonai is my shepherd, I am complete. In lush meadows you let me lie down. Alongside tranquil waters you lead me. You restore my life. You guide me in paths of righteousness for the sake of your name. Even when I walk through the valley of deep darkness, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they reassure me. You set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. Wine brims over my cup. Indeed, goodness and steadfast love shall pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai as long as I live. We turn again to 30b, a poem that's well known in Israel. Our angels spend much of their time sleeping. In their dreams, they tear down the new houses by the sea and build old ones in their place. No matter how long they may sleep, 100, 200 years, 10 centuries is not too much. The first to wake up takes the torch that has been handed down, adds a drop of oil to the lamp, blesses the eternal light, and then recalls the name of every other angel. And one by one, as they are remembered, they wake up. For them, as for us, there is nothing more beautiful than memory. On 33a, God, full of compassion, you dwell in the heights and in the depths. Grant perfect rest under the wings of your presence to our dear friend Bob, our loved one who has entered eternity. Let him find refuge forever in the shadow of your wings. Let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. For you, the everlasting God, you are his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say Amen. Kaddish is on 34a, and we remember him. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon, v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, v'agala u'vizman kariv v'meru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lalmei almaya. V'yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudesha berechu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'meru. Amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'meru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'meru. Amen. May the source of peace and peace to all who mourn, comfort to all who hurt, here and everywhere. Let's say Amen. You can be seated. I'm grateful that we are able to gather tonight. I know Bob's family needed a close, intimate space, and there are some from CU and from our congregations that wanted to come together, and I'm glad we were able to do a little sharing, and David has really been instrumental in bringing us together tonight. So he's going to share a few things, and I just want to say one of the gifts that David gave, I've only been here 8 years, so we're going to see a couple of little sneak peeks of Bob lecturing, and I've never seen that part of him. I only saw him after, his stroke. So it was amazing. And even still, all of these years that I've been here and he's been coming to our Torah study, he's still been an important teacher for lots of us. Speaking from the Bima, talking about inclusions and folks with disability, and he was a good teacher. And I'm glad that you're gonna share your things, and I'm gonna get our computer ready. But for our friends online, you need a microphone. So do you want to wear like the Madonna thing, or do you want to use this over here? All right, hey, that's all set up.
It's okay to do it here, and then.
Can I take the phone since now you're
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everybody from Har HaShem, from CU. Closer.
No, not that close.
I wanted to thank you all for coming and honoring our friend. I'm just going to say a few words. The rabbi's going to get up, keyed up, and I just wanted to say some things. I think, Rabbi, what I'm going to do is I think it's better for me if I can say the comments after we do this. But what I did want to say about Bob is, he was born in Cincinnati. When he passed away, December 26th, I think, he was 77 years old. And he was from, as I said, Cincinnati. His academic credentials, he got his bachelor's from Columbia. He got his master's from Yale. 2 years later, he got his doctorate from Yale. So, and then he was in other places as well. He was the author of, I think, 8 books himself, and then I think he helped edit with some co-authors some other books. And what can I say? You all knew him, and he was just he was a piece of work, that guy, I'll tell you. So let's do this, and then I have a few other things to say. And then the most important thing this evening is not, there is food out there, by the way, so please don't just run off. But the most important thing tonight, I think, really is for us to have a few moments to just share whatever you choose to share, and that often helps us as well as honors our friend. So stay tuned. Right at the very, very beginning.
Professor of History at the University of Colorado at Boulder. He is also the director of the International Studies Program at Colorado. He's the author of numerous very important books in the history of American foreign relations. His most recent book was called A Time for Peace, which looked at the U.S. And Vietnam since the end of the Vietnam War. He's also written on the Vietnam War itself in the previous book called A Time for War. He's written on Henry Kissinger, the Council of Foreign Relations, and is currently working on a book on the United States in the 1990s. And his lecture today is entitled Iraq and Vietnam, Lessons Learned and Mislearned. Bob?
Well, thank you very much, Andrew, and everyone. I'm delighted to be here. It's a beautiful campus, it's a beautiful room, and it's a beautiful day. And I'd like to talk to you about had tested what would appeal. Now, those students, they were all sophomores, juniors at the time. They're well graduated. So I haven't been back to them to ask them what the reaction is now, 4 years later. I can assure you, when I've taught the course since that time, the reaction has been very, very different. And in the 10 days before the war in Iraq broke out, on March the 19th, the subject matter happened to be that fateful 2-year period, 1963 to 1965. And I had spent a lot of time talking about Lyndon Johnson. There is just an abundance of documentary, visual, and auditory record of those months. And I and Andy Johns, who teaches the similar course here, I'm sure makes use of very similar material. At one point, I played them a tape recording of Lyndon Johnson talking in May of 1965 of his concern, his true anguish about sending American troops. He talked about his valet, a man with 8 children. He said, I don't want to send those boys to that war. I showed him some videos of him speaking about the war from 1964 to 1966, saying he wanted to that he wanted to follow a middle course, that he didn't want to escalate too much, didn't want to get China involved in this war, but that Vietnam, South Vietnam was America's ally and he couldn't abandon them. Then I showed them some pictures of Lyndon Johnson in 67, 68, famous pictures, his head in his hand. I talked about how when the casualties began to mount, Johnson couldn't sleep. Every night he would go down to the war room in the basement of the White House to get the casualty figures. They didn't come in as quickly as they do and nowadays. And the sheer anguish. My own view of Lyndon Johnson had changed, developed over the 30 years from the time I was a college student. I was a college student from 1963 to 1967, not 1977. I was a graduate student from 1967 to 1971, so Vietnam hung over those years. Vietnam was one of the reasons I got into the business I'm in, of studying the history of American foreign relations. I and most of my friends had very negative feelings toward Lyndon Johnson at this time. I thought he was a man, he was reckless, that he was insensitive to human life, that he had wrecked a country far away from the United States, and had done similar things in the United States. No sympathy for him whatsoever. As time had gone on, and more of this documentary evidence became available, I became more sympathetic to Johnson, seeing the constraints under which he acted, and also the human side of the man, that he really did anguish over these issues. I had a conversation with my students at this time 3 years ago, talking about the nature of presidential leadership, comparing Lyndon Johnson of the 1960s with the current president, George W. Bush. Because in those weeks and days leading up to the war in Iraq, questioners would ask Bush whether he felt the same kind of anguish that Lyndon Johnson had about concern over the putting in harm's way young people, some of whom he would know or would be the children of people he would know. He replied no, that he did not have difficulty sleeping. He had made up his mind. He was going to do what the military advised him to do. My students' reactions was quite interesting. When I showed them the clips of Johnson explaining several sides of the issues and played them the audio of Johnson talking about how hard it was to send young men into danger and possibly death, my expectation was that their reaction would be similar to the one that I had developed in my 40s and 50s, that he was a man who was deeply concerned and anguished, and this was a very human decision. Their reaction wasn't that way at all. They said he sounded weak. And in the weeks leading up to the Iraq War, their reaction was, Bush is showing strong leadership. Bush had obviously, for a man who said he never listened to the polls, had tested what would appeal. Now those students, they were all sophomores, juniors at the time. They're well graduated. So I haven't been back to them to ask them what the reaction is now, 4 years later. I can assure you, when I've taught the course since that time, the reaction has been very, very different.
I selected that from, there are a number of videos of Bob on YouTube. So if anybody is interested in revisiting and seeing him, just search for Robert Schulzinger on YouTube. And when I saw this goes on, for I think even over an hour, but I just felt like this said so much about Bob and the way it's the Bob I've known, and I'm sure that those of you who have known him much longer than I can certainly attest to how real this section was. There was a woman who I spoke with yesterday, Dr. Diane Coons, from I think she was from Durham, and she sent a little thing that I just wanted to read very quickly. Bob graduated at the top of his class in high school and was his school's representative to Boise State, where he won the teen delegates' popular vote to become Ohio's representative to Boys Nation. The 50 state winners traveled to Washington. A visit to the White House was the grand finale. One of Bob's fellow Boys Nation attendees that year was Bill Clinton, who got his first glimpse of his later home, and according to Bob, was politicking even then. As you all know this society much better than I, those of you from CU, as SHAFR members know, what does that stand for? Society of Historians for American Foreign Relations. As the members know, Bob was a brilliant historian, a spellbinding lecturer, and a wonderful writer. His books remain standard reading in campuses across the country. My daughter, Sarah, and I visited Bob several years ago, and he had some great conversations about history and other subjects. But because he was just Bob, it was only after he died that her daughter realized that Bob was the Robert Schulzinger whose books remain required reading at the University of Pennsylvania. My knowledge of Bob goes back to a number of years ago in Torah study. I always paid attention when he spoke. I was always mesmerized by him. After his absence from those meetings due to his stroke, I missed him very much. Fortunately, he was able to return with assistance. Our rides to and from Torah study will always be a cherished memory. When I think of him, two words surface immediately: realism and positivity. He never expressed or acted like someone who had been dealt bad luck insofar as his physical limitations at birth. So what? You use what you do have, not dwell on what you can't do anything about. That's the good Dr. Bob. That's what he lived. As we can see from the video, he practiced that creed, and he did it so well. What a mind. What passion he brought to the classroom. He was a great teacher, sharing what he thought by inviting students into his world, revealing his search, and making them part of it. Looking at the Bob we have all of us have known, his success can be traced back to his parents. His mother was told to institutionalize him. She would not hear of it. For all of us, it is important to remember the person Bob became is testimony to the power of unconditional love. His knowledge of history and Judaism was extraordinary. He knew so much classic Jewish literature. You may know this, but he was raised in an Orthodox Jewish household. An example of how he could mentally locate and talk about his knowledge of Judaism is what he knew the book of each prophet and could elaborate on a lot of what they had to say. In so many areas, he had a point of view, and he was not afraid to share it. And, importantly, to tell you how he got there. And then there was the infamous Schulzingerian humor. Bob and I were driving to Torah study one Shabbat morning, and it was when the Democrats, this was in 2000, maybe early 2020, late 2019, and the Democratic, there were still a lot of Democratic candidates for the 2020 election at that point. And Bob was not happy about the number of people who he considered too old to be president. And, and so he was quite critical. He looked at, I remember what he did was he said, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, are just, they're too old to be president. Well, but then again, I guess if Warren ends up being vice president and Biden's president, we could have a nurse there, and she could take care of both of them at the same time and save the taxpayer some money. What a bargain for taxpayers. I've lost my personal bookmark of history and current world events. I loved our discussions about what was going on. And I really came to rely on him. I said once, tell me, Bob, of other times in our nation's history when we have had presidents act like the Donald. To normalize, the reason I asked him is I wanted him to normalize the very worrying things that were taking place. He could not. And I scolded him for it. I wanted him to make me feel better. He was and is a role model to all of us, giving new meaning to the idea when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Goodbye, my friend. Rest in peace. So I would like to open it up and just say whatever you want to say in terms of any memories that you want to share. Just anything that would be good for you to say would be great for us to hear. Yeah, come on up. If you would, it would be good to have people come up just so that the people at home could really hear you. Oh, it's Bill. Hi, Bill. Well, why don't you come this way so the streamers can see you? Yeah, just look straight out there and it would be good. Keep that pretty close. There you go. Is that good?
Yeah. I was privileged to actually take a course from Bob. I was, I guess, in my second retirement, and decided I might want to get a master's degree in history. So I started taking courses, and I took his Vietnam course for graduate credit. And I have to say, Bob Schulzinger was by far the best lecturer I have ever had the privilege of being in his class. And I've had a lot of education, all the way up through a master's in law. Nobody touched Bob. He just had a way of presenting material that kept you interested. And of course, I got to read his book on the Vietnam War. And as a person who avoided that war, it was interesting to get the background and the insight that he presented. But his lecturing was superb. And as a result, we did become friends. And I'll miss him. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to come up? Rabbi Bronstein, come on up.
Well, I have a few things that I'd like to say. One of the, I miss Bob. Last year he couldn't come to my Seder. He used to come to my Seders because of his immobility. But for many years he came to my Seder, and I used to give homework. It was probably before, did I give you homework? Anyway, he was so interesting and deep and made the Seder so wonderful. Last year, Misha Plum died, and we lit a yahrzeit candle and said Kaddish before we started the Seder, and we're going to do that again this year. When I was the rabbi at this congregation, I had a different style than Rabbi Green in terms of bar and bat mitzvahs. And what I did was I told stories and that were based on whatever the child gave his or her Devar Torah on. And most of the time, our members did not come to ceremonies where they weren't friends with the family or related to the family. Bob came to every single service, and it was like he welcomed every young person into the adult community of Har HaShem, and I would ask questions, he would respond to the questions, he would challenge the child. And it just made this kid feel like, oh, there's a mentor here who's here for me. He's not my uncle, I don't know him, but he came to services for me. And that was one of the things I just loved so much about Bob. And the last thing I'll say was, after he had a stroke, I ran over to the synagogue, not to the synagogue, to the hospital. And it was, I went there Friday afternoon, and I brought electric candlesticks, and I brought grape juice, and I brought challah. And he wasn't able to talk at that time. And so I didn't assume I would hear anything from him. But I started chanting the blessings, and he just chanted along with me. And I thought, a miracle is happening here. And I left the room pretty quickly, and I ran down to the nurse's station, and she said, well, singing comes from a different part of the brain than speaking does. So she said, this is a very good sign, but it's not a miracle. But I miss Bob very much, and I'm sorry he's not with us anymore.
That was beautiful. Anyone else? Okay. Yeah, Jim.
first, it's so moving to listen to him talk like that. So I moved here 7 years ago, and I knew Bob from Torah study, and he talked just as he could express himself just as well. It just took a while. And so when he started talking, we would wait till he was done, right? And it was always worthwhile. And when I got here, I used to occasionally lead Torah study at my old temple, and I wanted to do it here. And finally, they gave me the dais one week, and Bob asked a lot of really pointed questions. I'm like, oh man, and one after another, and try to deal with them and address them. And then I remember at the end, I was going to the parking lot, and David was, helping Bob get into the car. And I heard Bob turn to David and go, "That was really good." I don't know that I've ever felt so affirmed as when he did that. And I was just, as you're talking, I won't relay them. There's so many comments that Bob would make that would just be next level, and you go, wow. Some of them relating to his own personal pain and experiences in life that were just a gift that he shared with all of us. So rest in peace, Bob.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, come on up.
My name is Midge Korchak, and I was in graduate school, I guess, when Bob came to see you, which would have been the late 70s, right? He's exactly 6 months younger than I am. We're both 77. I cannot remember how we met, but he was living in that little house on Darley. You remember, Tom? In South Boulder? And when I went there, I can't remember why. The house was a mess. There's just papers all over, bills, and it was just a mess. And this is in contrast to his intellectual prowess, which we're all aware of. So I said, "Come on, Bob, get a cleaning person to fix this up." No. I don't know if he said he couldn't afford it or he didn't know what to do. I said, "I'll clean your house." I don't think I had him as a teacher. I was doing modern European history, but I was in the history department then. So I would clean his house, and he had bills strewn all over and magazines on the toilet like somebody else I know. I mean, it was really messy. And I thought, how can anybody live like this? They're going to turn off your electricity. There's rotten milk in the fridge. How can you do this? So there was such a conflict or a break between his intellectual academic life, which was obviously superb, and his home management, I guess you'd call it. But they never had his electricity turned off, as far as I knew, or his water or anything. So somehow he pulled it off. But I also remember he had a record player and records, which I guess back then we all had those things. And I would play. He had a lot of classical music, and I would play the things that I liked. And I think it was there that I heard for the first time Carmina Burana, perhaps, that he had, which has since become one of my absolute favorite pieces. So while cleaning his house, I was introduced to music that I didn't know. We became very good friends. We used to go have lunch at the Broker used to have a lovely lunch and hotel, and which of course it doesn't anymore, but he and I would go there. And we'd swim. When I was in graduate school, we'd go over to the rec center. I guess it's new now on campus. And we would swim, and he would swim. He'd get on his whatever things he needed and crawl down into the pool and swim. He exercised a lot. I'd known him so long, and I will miss him terribly. He was a character and an intellectual and a very special friend. So I will miss him.
Thank you very much. I didn't know Bob in those days, but I want to tell you, after Marie came into his life, you could eat any off the floor anywhere in recent years. So, Marie, if you're listening, thanks for cleaning that guy up. Patricia, do you want to say something? Come on up.
Well, I just wanted to say that I had the pleasure of knowing Robert Schulzinger in 2 different areas of my life. I used to work at the CU Boulder History Department as a word processing person, admin assistant, and I helped type a couple books. I can't remember how many, but I know I helped type, word process at least a couple of his books, and my duties also included typing tests, and it was interesting to see how he put foreign relations into these books and history that was a little bit, I lived through the period, but I was a kid, so it was interesting to learn more about it through his eyes. And then when I became a member of this congregation, I got to know him in a different mode at Torah study, and for a while I was also helping give him rides to Torah study, and so we got to talk about things that had totally different, like our families, and he always asked about my family. So rest in peace, Bob.
Thanks, Patricia. One of the things that I'm really comforted by is when you look at some of these videos that are going to be there, hopefully, long after us. Bob has a grandson who Elizabeth had just, I think Asher was born a year ago last month, I think. Maybe 2 years? I don't know the years anymore, especially with COVID. But I'm so glad that he will get to see his grandfather, in that way, because he's too young to remember some of the things that, that they talked about. I think he's probably 2 now that I'm thinking about it. So, anybody else want to say anything? Okay, Rabbi, I think that's it. And please, please, please have some coffee, tea, and some fruit and chocolate chip cookies and things like that.
That sounds neat.